Last night I had the strangest dream in this bleak century. I dreamed that people the world around believed in chivalry. I dreamed I saw a kingly crown enshrined in laurel leaves, with grace and hope and purity attendant at his feet.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Chivalry podcast. I'm Sir Roland DeGray, your host, and today on the podcast, we are joined by Duchess Cecilia Mowebray, a good friend of mine, and we are going to be discussing a little bit on the topic of largesse. So I'm really excited about this one, and I'd like to say welcome, Duchess Cecilia.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So why don't you give us just a little background about yourself? What is it that you are known for, and maybe what is it that you've done in the SCA?
So I'm a duchess. So I've reigned twice, both in the Outlands and in Atenvelt. It was a while ago for both of them. I'm also a mistress of the laurel for costume research, and then also for calligraphy and illumination. I did a lot of research when I was in Atenvelt on 14th century clothing and accessories and lifestyle and whatever. And I'm currently interested more in sort of Viking age Norway, okay, and etc. I also paint and I sing, and I learned to play the lyre recently, which I'm super excited about. And my background is in education and science, and I certainly approach the SCA with that sort of mentality. I like to know stuff before I make decisions about stuff.
I think that's a good way to proceed throughout the world.
I don't always get there, but that's my goal.
For sure. So as I've kind of started off with most of these, I wanted to just get a sense of what are some of the people that have influenced you as you've played the game. What are some of the maybe the high points that has helped shape how you play and how you think about what we do in the society?
I think in terms of mentorship, I'm certainly my laurel was a huge part of my early journey. While he had an impact on my art journey, but I think more than anything, especially talking about largesse and franchise and that sort of thing, he was just such an incredibly generous person. And I'm talking about, I'm going to say the whole name, Sir Domingo Diego Diaz de la Vega Martin, which we all had to learn how to say. It was very important to him. He was actually here for a while. He was in the military. He was in Colorado somewhere. I don't know where he was. But he's, at the time that I was his student, he was a master of the laurel for costuming. He's also a pretty amazing cook, super well researched. Great feast steward. He's also a white scarf, and he's also now a knight as well. So he's in Atenvelt again, inspiring all of them to be weird and not care what other people want you to do. And I think what was most inspiring about him to me, in terms of mentorship, is that he was so generous with his time, and he would teach anyone anything, no matter what. And being his student didn't mean that I necessarily got all of his attention, which I thought was fine. He had a weekly open house where you could go, and he would help you with anything. He taught me to pewter cast, and he, taught me how to pattern, kind of. He taught you how to redact a recipe while at the same time showing you how to use a medieval or a Victorian era cloth mangler. He was just such a diverse artist. And I think that's something that I really got from him as well. And I think that was a huge influence on me. And then he was also just a super good friend. And he was really free with his advice and his time and his sympathy. And he was really important to me. And then I think also in that same era, there was a scribe in our kingdom, Maestra Alex the scribe, who I actually don't know where she is now. I think she's somewhere back east. And she was our kingdom scribe, and she had a huge impact on my scribal journey. She helped me or encouraged me to set up a scriptorium in my barony, as we hadn't had an active kingdom scriptorium to that point. She really encouraged us to sort of build a collaborative community of scribes, and to be generous with materials and knowledge and books and literature and just time and energy and whatever. And so I think, and again, talking about bringing it back to Largesse, the amount of time that she and material goods that she dedicated to helping new scribes was really remarkable. I think that most people would have neither the time nor the energy nor the money to be as generous as she was. And so that was a huge impact to me. I think she's going to laugh when I say this, but my best friend, Mariana, Countess Mariana, who's here now, was also a huge part of my dream. She elevated me, which was weird. But you talk about someone who is unbelievably generous with their time and energy. I admire that about her tremendously, because I'm not that generous. And she's just also really a remarkable person, and someone who definitely her level of engagement with the SCA has been very inspiring to me. She'll step in and take care of anything that needs to be taken care of, which is why she's both a laurel and a pelican, in addition to being a royal peer. She's really a remarkable member of this group, and I think quite admirable. And I'm super excited to have her here, and I'm very excited to see how she's going to impact the culture of our barony, her and her sister both.
Yeah, I agree.
Long answer.
No, that was a great answer. I agree wholeheartedly with that final statement. It's fascinating to me how many people have kind of joined us in Alberon in the last year and a half. With the pandemic being on, it's not giving us a clear picture as to how they will choose to participate, or how they how that will impact us. But I'm very excited myself to see how they begin to participate and how they kind of find their path here locally. So Largesse is the topic today, as I mentioned before. I feel like we have a very concrete system, at least in this kingdom, that bears the name Largesse. And I think maybe if we talk a little bit about what that system is and how it kind of practically functions, then I'd like to maybe talk about how that compares to the period concept of Largesse as it stands. Sound okay?
Yeah.
All right. So would you, to the best of your ability, describe how we carry out the system of Largesse that exists in the SCA at large, currently in the current Middle Ages?
So I feel like the sort of the function of Largesse in the SCA is stuff that you give as a thank you, right? And so, I think if you look at it from an artist perspective, I think artists are often encouraged to provide largesse to the cornet, to the crown, to their local groups, and it's often sort of organized at a central point and then distributed back out to autocrats, to staff, to whoever's doing nice stuff for you. Mm-hmm. And then as artists, I think artists are encouraged to donate things to Largesse as a way of demonstrating their dedication to the game and to that concept of gratitude, I guess, or as a way to sort of get themselves known outside of their local group. we have largesse derbies, and they become little mini ANS competitions, which I think is a great application, because then you really are demonstrating the kind of interesting little things that people are doing in your group that you wouldn't necessarily see otherwise. If I make 700 tiny bags, nobody knows about my 700 tiny bags. And in a largesse, nobody needs to know about my 700 tiny bags. But if I was an up and coming artist and I was like making some super awesome little tiny bags, it would be rad if somebody saw that. So I think largesse competitions are a great opportunity for people to see art. And then I think, that all that stuff kind of gets given to somebody who then gives it to somebody else. And then sometimes those things are amazing and you're like, I'm going to keep this forever and use it for every purpose imaginable. And then some of that stuff, you're like, I don't even know what this is or what it is doing anywhere. And then 5 years later, it's still in circulation, from gift basket to gift basket. Those are always hilarious. I was really like, I saw this stag glittery Christmas ornament 3 years ago. It's back. Hooray. So I think the concept of largesse in the SCA is great. I think the idea of thanking your staff, the crown's going to give you a gift basket, the barons and baronesses in attendance are going to give you a gift basket, and then you can, as an autocrat, distribute that amongst the people who have helped you run that event. I mean, that's great, right? It's a thank you. It's saying, hey, we really value your contribution, and here's a material representation of that comes from another member of the populace who is peripherally also thanking you for your participation and making a cool thing that we all get to go to and enjoy. I'm not sure it always works out that way, but I think that's the point of it. That's the goal of it.
Yeah, I think there's folks that are able to make that work with greater or lesser success depending on what they're putting out there in terms of largesse, what they are maybe how they're presenting it as well.
Sure.
The thing that we and by we I mean Amanya and I as Baron and Baroness of Alberon, the thing that we kind of consciously thought about was we don't ever want the largesse that is given to seem like it was an afterthought or seem like it was only done because it's expected to be done. Because sometimes when things are expected to be done, whether you mean to or not, and I largely think this is inadvertent actually, but sometimes it just seems like it's being done, out of obligation and not out of its true purpose. And
sort of pro forma.
Yeah. And again, when that does come up, I don't think that it's necessarily on purpose more often than not. I think that usually it's because something else was going on, or perhaps it's a large event and the focuses have been scattered. There's any number of reasons why that make a lot more sense than somebody just being inconsiderate, right?
Sure.
So, but I would agree with your assessment. I think that our system of largesse is by design there to help encourage people to continue to do good works and thank them. So
one thing I will say, you artists, if you're giving largesse, put your name on it. Because I've received some cool stuff and I have no idea. And some of that's my fault because maybe they were labeled and then I put that label somewhere and then I don't know what happened to it. But if you're doing largesse because you're trying to get attention, there's nothing wrong with that.
Well,
artists need to get recognized for their work. And so I don't think artists should feel like there's something wrong with wanting, somebody to know that they donated something that was really cool. Like, put your name on it.
I don't disagree. I mean, artists
want to know that you did that.
Yeah, artists can sign their work. There's nothing wrong with signing your work. Not at all.
Absolutely.
We can get into intent. That's neither here nor there. That's not what we're talking about today.
No, largesse. Focus.
So now to shift over to the sort of historic use of the term largesse, and kind of establishing it as, for the purposes of this discussion, I was doing a little reading, and we had a little discussion prior to recording about, what exactly, what is this word? What does it mean? Do we, is it about just saying thank you? And it turns out that no, that's not really what it was about in the period, and that's okay. I mean, but I think that it's very easy for me to understand how they made that jump whenever they decided to start saying, and I'm sure it was very early in the society, to say, well, we're going to give largesse as a means of saying thank you. Like I can see where that jump was made and why it's made. It is an act of generosity either way, I think, whether you think of it as a thank you or if you think of it as the more period intent. But I think for the purposes of the conversation, I think it's important to point out that largesse in the period was far more a practical function of securing retainers. and not only securing retainers, but making sure that they had what they needed, is less about giving them, things that were of maybe sentimental value, which is a lot of what can oftentimes be given in the SCA. We see a lot of things that are kind of fancy or maybe well made, but they gave a lot in the period. I think they gave a lot of raw materials, and also particularly for knights, a lot of armor, and as we discussed right before we started, horses. So I think that context in which we approach largesse can be supplemented by understanding its period context.
Sure.
So,
and I feel like it's, you give your liegemen the stuff that they need to do the job that you need them to do.
yes.
So you think, like, I can think of two examples. One is Edward III, right? When he started the Order of the Garter, the tradition became that at Pentecost every year, he would give his knights, a certain amount of fabric so that they could all have matching outfits.
Right.
And then any of the stuff that was needed to make those outfits fancy. Like there's one account of him giving, he gave a bunch of, I think it was blue wool or something, but he gave a bunch of enamel belt plaque things to sew on. And there's actually an illumination that shows a guy wearing a long tunic with a bunch of knight things all over it. I made Walrick a tunic based on that. And they're in the Exchequer reports for Edward's reign, and it was like a big metal belt that was enameled in blue, because that's that's the symbol of the order. And so he wanted, because he was so into pomp and ceremony, right? And that's expensive.
Yes.
And so he wanted his knights to be able to show up at a fancy dress event and be like, look at us, aren't we super awesome? And our matching blue coat de voyage with our cool enamel belts all over them. And then that's showing, that sort of like, this is the tribe, and we are wearing something that's symbolic of our station, but it's then being provided by the person who wants us to be showing off that station and who has theoretically the money to provide that to us. And then you see that with fabric a lot, where a knight will give, or a earl or a duke or whatever, will give everyone in his household, from knight to servant, 5 ells of fabric every year for Christmas. And that's what they're going to use to make their annual suit. And they're going to wear that all year. And then the next year, he's going to give them another 5 ells of fabric. And then everyone matches. So you've got like rad heraldic unity or whatever. But then also your staff gets one outfit a year that they don't have to pay for.
Right. They just got to put in the time. And
Yeah. And then you're like, I want to work for that guy because he gives super cool fabric for Christmas.
Exactly. And I think that that's a part that's in play that obviously doesn't really work for us, at least when it comes to crowns and coronets. There's no real practical vying for the services of retainers between our landed nobility or the crown, or vice versa.
Okay.
One might make an argument that you could do such a thing to have people join maybe knightly households or households that are unofficial within the context of the
Sure.
game. But I wouldn't even say that I see a lot of people doing that. So
No. I don't know. My largesse can be, letting someone camp in my super sweet streamside camping spot at Battlemore.
That's not a bad example. I mean, having the ability to house a certain amount of people in a choice location
Yeah.
translates very well, I think, to the concept of medieval largesse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of made that distinction, or rather supplement, if you will, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this topic is because you have been a queen in the past, and you've reigned in 2 different locations, which is not as common. You don't see it as often. And furthermore, you reigned in 2 different kingdoms that were once the same kingdom. So there's some similarities. Please go ahead.
We're asking Goonbolt, why is this tradition the opposite of Atenvelt? And he said, because it was the opposite of Atenvelt. I was like, really? That's the reason? He's like, yep.
There was a lot of that, from what I understand.
Thought it would be loftier, but whatever. That's cool.
It works. You've got to have a reason.
Sure. Trying to be unique. I mean, it makes sense. You're trying to build a brand new identity.
For sure. So how has your experience as queen shaped your opinions about largesse and maybe the importance of participating in it?
I mean, I don't particularly remember a lot of largesse related things about our reign in Atenvelt. What I do remember is that we converted our guest room to storage. Like, we took the bed out, we had shelving on the walls, the whole room was just storage. And some of that was regalia, but a lot of it was largesse. And it was that was a lot of largesse, where you can line the walls of a 10 by 12 room with it. Like I said earlier, I love the concept of largesse. I think that, it sort of becomes conflated with our sort of American consumerism, where we think that it has to be like that more is always better. And so you think, oh, the person who's the most generous is the one whose basket is overflowing the most. And then it almost becomes sort of competitive, like largesse giving becomes competitive to the point where at Estrella, and I think this was probably just before us, and we reigned in Atenvelt like 12 years ago, something like that. So Cora was a year old when we stepped up. So 12 years ago. And just before that, they had changed it to the Estrella gift exchange between the crowns. Used to be it was obscene, truthfully. Like, you talk about gross consumerism. It was just like everyone competing to see who could give the most stuff. And then all these people have to travel home with all this stuff. Like, it's a lot. And it's a real burden to the arts community as well, to be constantly like, I got to have more stuff. And then the response to that is for the stuff to be less cool because you have to produce so much of it. And so if you want really cool items, then you've got to give artists some room to do that. And so at Estrella, they changed it to where you only have, you get kind of assigned, and they do this at Estrella still, they did it at Penzic. I have no memory of how largesse works at Battlemore. That's embarrassing. I just realized I don't remember. That wasn't that long ago. Wow. But where it was just a gift exchange with a single kingdom. And I mean, it used to be at Estrella where it's like, if there were 12 kingdoms, then 12 gifts would go out per crown. And it was just like, oh my God. So it was a lot. So I think that when the focus becomes consumerism and volume and kind of wanting to kind of out give or, out compete for generosity, then I think that turns largesse into something a little bit ickier. And I think that's a little bit what you see as crown, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm expected to give so much stuff, but I'm also expected to like acquire so much stuff to give out. And our largesse coordinator did such a good job. It was Mistress Bianca.
Mhm.
And, she made and acquired some beautiful personalized stuff. But one of the things that was really important to me that second reign was I made a lot of my largesse myself. And Walrick did a bunch of it too, which was awesome because he doesn't do a ton of art and he's actually really good at art. And, we had sort of seen when we moved here, like the volume of gift bags that were given to autocrats, the crown and every B&B. And, when you have a big event like Midwinter, where there's 5 other baronies who have sent representatives, like that's a lot of stuff. And I've only autocrated a couple of times, but it was a lot of stuff. And it felt, I don't know, it started to feel a little impersonal. And so I think for us, we wanted to make it feel like that we were thanking the autocrats or we were thanking our officers or our attendants or whatever. And so we made, instead of getting like a bunch of gifts together for an autocrat, we figured the baronies would do that, honestly. And we made something for each autocrat personally. And the truth is, I thought it sounded like a great idea. I never got any feedback on it. So I actually don't know if people thought that was a good idea or if they were like, you cheapskate. Where's my awesome basket of stuff? Like, I have no idea. Hopefully not. But because we wanted, I don't know, I feel like part of gift giving is the thought that goes into it. Like I didn't want it to be impersonal. And so, I made little painted boxes for people. I made rosaries for people. I made pilgrim badges for people. Walrick did a couple of cool little, what's the word? Marquetry boxes that were neat. We just tried to do something different each time because we wanted our autocrats to feel like we weren't just kind of giving them a high five and saying thank you. I mean, we did that too. But we wanted them to feel like we really appreciated them because for us, that was the point of largesse. And so I think as crown, it can be overwhelming, the amount of stuff that you're expected to do. But I think as long as the intent is there, like I'm not saying that what we did was better than giving a giant basket of stuff. I don't know that it was, to be quite honest with you, because there is an expectation that I think people have that you want to meet. But I think that was my biggest takeaway from being crowned with regards to largesse is that there's so much. And like you're given stuff and then you're not really sure what to do with it all. And then you're like, is this, because people like give you something and they're like, here, we want you to have this. And you're like, well, is this for me or is this for largesse? And then I'm not really sure. And then you're like, am I being a total jerk because I like want this for myself because it's super cool? And then there's guilt. And then I don't know that I've answered your question. There's a lot of largesse as crown. And it's a little weird to know exactly how to use largesse to best serve its purpose.
Sure.
That was a really long-winded answer. I feel like I talked around that question.
I think that you hit some of the things that I wanted to continue to talk about for sure, which
Good
is
for me.
intent with your largesse. I think that because sometimes expectation drives it, sometimes wanting to outdo the other person drives it, we get away from what the real intent should be. I think that if we can use the more period sentiment to inform our decisions about largesse to do it better.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I've gotten from it.
Yeah. I'm not saying that I think there are crowns who were like, I'm going to show up all those barons with my giant gift. Like, I don't think that that's a deliberate choice from anybody. I think there is a little bit of that when you go to a foreign war, perhaps.
I think that that's probably true. It's probably more
where you're like,
there.
My artists are super rad and I'm going to give the best gift basket that possibly can exist on Earth. I felt that. because I wanted to show off our kingdom and our artists, and I wanted to be like, ha, take that, Eldemir. I would say it was Eldemir. I think that's who we exchanged with.
That's right, Eldemir. You
Like,
Canadians,
take that, Eldemir. They were great. Our gifts from Eldemir were amazing. They gave us, oh my God. So this is unrelated, but it's about Largesse, sort of. The king of Eldemir at the time, I don't remember what his name was, which is embarrassing. He was like super into games, like period games, and he had decks of cards made that, and they just looked like normal, you know, they were printed. They weren't like period cards or anything, but they had like him and the queen, like they were so cool. We still have them. They were the coolest thing I've ever seen because they were super personalized. And he was giving them, I think, is like, because they were doing some sort of running game competition, I think, and they were like the prizes for participating. I'm probably making all that up, but it was so cool. Really.
Well, I mean,
that was rad.
Maybe that right there kind of speaks to the potential impact that Largesse can have, especially if it's personalized, especially if it ties in with something that you're trying to accomplish. I think that using your ability as either crown or cornet to capture everyone's attention, to bring focus to an individual and thank them, whether you give them something or not, could be considered an act of largesse. I think that the whole concept of largesse is using your station to help elevate others at key moments in times. Sometimes that's with goods, sometimes that's with ennoblement through awards. And I think that I think intent is very much at the core of that. And if you are intending to give a personal thank you, it makes a lot more sense to make something yourself or to give them a thing than it would to say give them a basket of things that may or may not have been even collected by you. Because as you well know, and as I know as a landed noble, you inherit largesse items. So that's very impersonal by comparison. It's not that it's bad. It just, you know, if your intent is to be, this is a personal thank you to someone, this came from my own hand, that, in my opinion, that speaks in a different way to that individual. Not to discount the other's just fine. But, you know, if you're trying to make that statement, and the example that you gave that you guys did when you reigned here, I remember that. I remember that very fondly. I remember being a temporary herald in some of your courts and helping you do that, you know? So I do think it has I think your intent was realized. And I don't think that people thought it was
I appreciate that.
weird or cheapskatey, you know. I don't think that was what came across at all. So let's see. So let's talk a little bit about awards, because elevating one station is something that would have fallen squarely into the concept of period largesse as I'm beginning to learn and understand it. There's really only a handful of people in the society who get to do that. And you have been in that position yourself, and you have not only given awards of arms, grants of arms, but also peerages. You've done all of those things. So what benefit is truly derived from giving awards in society, in your opinion? Why is it something that we feel we need to do? Why can't we all just play and not worry about that sort of thing? What is its purpose?
I think that humans are by our nature driven by external goalposts. And I know that sometimes gets sort of a bad rap, because then you think, oh, you're chasing, you know, and not just in the SCA, but you're chasing a promotion, or you're chasing some sort of economic goalpost. But, you know, I think that that most people are not super intrinsically motivated, or they're not going to maintain that for long periods of time. I certainly am not. I'm profoundly lazy if I don't have, something that I have to do or a deadline or something. I would be happy to sit around and read a book for 2 months and do nothing else. And so I think to a certain extent, an award is, we always call it a cookie, right? You're chasing the cookie, and that's considered ugly. And I mean, I think it can become ugly, but I think for people who need to be motivated, that can be helpful. I also think humans are intrinsically driven by a need for acknowledgement, and to know that they're doing things that are helping others, because it's hard to tell that, right? You think to yourself, well, I think that, I identify this issue in my world, and this is how I'm going to solve it. Or this is a need, and this is how I'm going to fill it. But I'm not sure that we're always super clear on whether that's correct, right? Whether that's actually the right approach. And so I think awards can help reinforce the idea that what you're contributing to a group is beneficial to others. It is helping, you are on the right track, as it were. And I think the other side of that is that giving an award to a person who has been doing great work really helps the community around that person, because it shows that somebody's good works are being recognized by the whole, as it were, right? Like that the person who really helped you in whatever circumstance or with whatever task, they're being valued by others. And I think that is great too. Like, we want to see our heroes being acknowledged. And so being acknowledged feels really good, but I almost think it feels better to see someone who you really care about and really admire being recognized. Honestly, I think about the difference between how I felt when I was recognized as a laurel versus how I felt when, say, Mariana was recognized as a laurel. And there was no comparison. I was so happy for her. God, I'm going to cry right now. Like, that's ridiculous. My response to other people getting awards is always astronomically greater than my response to getting an award myself. And I think that is a huge and maybe underrated part of the award structure, is that reinforcement that the people that you love are important to others as well. And that there's somebody saying to them, you're important, because you know how that's going to make them feel.
Yeah.
Did that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. And I've experienced that myself. Not only just recently as being a Baron, but prior to that as being very integral in a lot of courts as the Herald. When you stand in that position and you get to see the reaction of these folks being recognized, AOAs are always the best, flat out.
Absolutely. AOAs are great.
When you see somebody, especially somebody who may have been overlooked for a while,
and who's kept going anyway.
Right. And just, it's out of the blue for them. There's pretty standard progression of nerves, then disbelief, then, overwhelming joy, but also emotion. There's oftentimes tears, well,
and then you can always see that moment when they hear the people behind them cheering.
Yeah.
Right. And that moment where you're like, and that's why I think it's important to give awards in public. I mean, that's a huge part of it. It's not just, the change in the OP or something. It's getting to have that moment where people are cheering behind you.
Yeah.
Like, God, that feels good. And it feels so good to create that moment for somebody else. Oh, it's so great. It's so great.
I agree.
So great.
I think if you can approach it from more the mentality of what we've just talked about, I think that you can really begin to think through why it's so important that you know why you're giving somebody something and can speak to what they've been doing that's
Yeah.
been so good. That's why I think that barons and baronesses by and large have an advantage, because they're covering
Yeah.
a smaller area, and crowns can, particularly in our kingdom being so spread out, not all kingdoms are our size, but I think that that's a disadvantage that some crowns have, is that, you know, if they weren't particularly well traveled before, you know, maybe it's their first time reigning, they're having to learn a lot of stuff on the fly, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. They're having to figure stuff out as they go. And the more experienced ones, it's a lot. There's a lot of people. It's a lot of people to keep
It's
track
true.
of. And but if you can stand up in front of everybody and tout their accomplishments and explain why they deserve this,
Yeah.
and then they get that reaction that you just described after being given the award, I think that not only can you encourage them to continue on their path doing what they've been doing, I think if people have the right mindset and they're watching, they are now looking at an example.
Sure. Well, and I think that moment, you know, where you hear other people responding to your recognition, I think that that's a moment where you start to understand the impact that you're having as an individual on a group. And I think that can be incredibly motivational.
Very powerful, yes.
You know, I think that was the biggest part, like of, you know, kind of getting my peerage was, you know, realizing all of a sudden, oh, people care about what I'm doing, and I can, like, people want to learn stuff from from me. Oh, okay, good. I guess I'll teach them then. You know, because I think there's always that, and especially with artists, because we're a bunch of insecure weirdos anyway. I said we. I am an insecure weirdo for sure. Um, I think, you know, I certainly fall prey to that idea of, well, what do I have to teach? Even now, you know, I'm looking at people wanting to have online collegiums, and I'm like, I don't even know what I would teach anymore. Like, it's so easy to think to yourself, oh, what I'm doing has value to me, but it doesn't necessarily have value to others. And I think that moment of recognition, whether it's an AOA, whether it's an Antares Kano, you know, that's a moment where you hear people validating your contributions, and you can say, okay, I'm doing something that has value to someone other than myself. And I think that's a super big deal. And I do think that being very specific, if you can, is very helpful for that as well. We worked pretty hard at that, because, you know, I think I kind of, quote unquote, grew up in the SCA where there were a lot of people who said, like, we've heard great reports of your efforts. Here's an AOA. And, you know, that gets old when it's every single award in a court. We've heard great reports of your efforts. Here's a arts award. We've heard great reports of your efforts. Here's a service award. And I think that the online award recommendation tools makes that a lot easier.
Yes.
So you write an award recommendation, audience members, and you super should put some details in there. Because sometimes you're just like, oh, I have no idea what you want from, like, I don't know what to say. And so then we would, like, go and talk to our barons and baronesses before events and say, like, hey, we're giving an award to this person. Number one, are they going to be there? But number two, you know, can you add anything to this that I can write in my little book and then say, because then it's, again, you're talking about making it more personal. You know, you want to make sure that whatever thank you you're giving, whether it's largesse or an award or whatever, that person understands that you value them, not that they're a name that you're checking off your list.
Correct.
You know, like, oh, cross that one off, Harold. We're go to the, like, I think it can become a little bit rote, those kinds of recognitions and thank yous. And I think it's super important that not be the case. And I mean, honestly, I can't think of a crown recently that hasn't made it personal. So, I mean, I think we do a great job of that. That online tool really helps. Use it.
I would agree. I think that that I think it'd be really out of place, if I'm being honest, particularly in the kingdoms that I frequent, to see somebody just kind of going through the motions like that.
Owning it in. I remember it when I was young in the SCA. I mean, I wasn't that young, but whatever. Like, I remember that vividly enough to have in my head, I never want to be that kind of crown. And I can't think of who did it. And I think it was normal. Like, I don't feel like there was like one crown that I can remember who was just lame and was like, I don't care about anyone. Like, I don't think that was a thing. I think that was how it was done, especially when you have like you said, a big kingdom. And, when I started playing an 8 and belt, it was already just 8 and belt. We didn't have anyone break off after I started playing. So it wasn't a big kingdom. But I think, and maybe it is to do with how we do award recommendations now. Like maybe 20 years ago, when you were just getting a letter, although you'd think if someone's going to take the time to write a letter, they would include some detail. I don't know. I wasn't crowned then, so I have no idea. But I feel like that was kind of normal for a long time. And then that started to change. And, the idea of us having like a little book up there that our little cheat sheet that we can look at. I see loads of crowns doing that. I knobbed that from somebody. I don't even remember who it was, but I remember there was a crown who did that. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's what I'm going to do if I ever get that opportunity. And I wish I could remember who it was, because that would be a better story. But but there was a point at which that changed, and I'm so grateful for it, because I think it makes such a big difference.
Sure. So kind of flipping it a little bit. Obviously there's inherent value in elevating people's station, making it public, being sincere, personalizing it. I think those all have extreme value in the context of what we're doing. But there are some obvious drawbacks, I think, to choosing to recognize versus not, or very simply, you can't recognize everybody all the time, all at once.
Yeah.
And that can be a little rough. Have you experienced any detrimental effects? Have you ever had anybody get real bitter with you about something or upset?
I mean, I have certainly, and I think the most obvious answer for me is kind of that road to peerage. I was never in that position. I was recognized before I thought I was ready. So I never had that, but I certainly have known some people who thought that they deserved that recognition well before they got it. And maybe those people were right. Maybe they weren't. I don't know. But I think that's a common story, where you have somebody who, and it's not just about peerages. I'm sure it's about all sorts of awards. I think that's kind of because for many people, that's sort of the pinnacle of their achievement or they think, in their region of stuff. That was a terrible way to phrase that.
It's the long game in the SCA.
The long game. Yes. That I think when you feel like you've, for lack of a better phrase, check the boxes for it. I hate to phrase it that way, but I think that probably illustrates my point clearly enough. You feel like you've done the things and your prowess is high. You think that you're contributing at a high level, and you see other people getting recognized and you're not getting recognized. I think it can be like, there's only so long that you can question what you're doing and improve what you're doing before it starts to get really frustrating. And I've absolutely seen that from people I love and care about. And that can be really damaging. And that sucks, especially when you're trying to, comfort that person or help that person understand. And especially when there isn't a good answer, because sometimes there isn't. Sometimes you're like, I don't know why you don't have a peerage yet. I think you're awesome. But then that's also eventually becomes not helpful either, right? And so I think there's the side effect of that, which is a bunch of people come to you and say, I don't understand why you're not a peer yet. And you're like, not me.
Not super helpful, actually.
I'm very grateful to have not had that experience. But I know plenty of people who have had that experience. Why aren't you a such and such yet? Why are you asking me? I'm not in charge of this stuff.
Well, and I think where I'm trying to go with this is that, having been a part of other nonprofit organizations that use award structures, they're all different, and ours is unique in a lot of different ways, but some of them do check boxes.
Yeah.
Some of them do have very, very clearly outlined requirements, and when you meet those requirements, you get the award. And it's less of a function of being recognized by one person or the other, as it seems to play out with us, and more of a
more objective.
Yes, it's much more objective. Now, I don't know which one's better. they both function. I've seen them be successful, but
Well, so I have an opinion about that.
well, I'm glad.
I think I have two experiences with that, right? And one is scouting, which I know is your experience too. And you know, Girl Scouts is not quite as rigorous as Eagle Scouts, but well, at the level that I did it. I mean,
Maybe.
I was in Girl Scouts I want to say I was 15 when my troop disbanded, and I got pretty far in the award structure there. But what's nice about scouting is, you know, you want to talk about like skill versus peer-like qualities. I think in scouting, there's sort of a separate track for each. That's how I remember it. You know, like I had a badge for horseback riding. I had a badge for some sort of arts, you know, pioneer art or whatever. Like
Right.
I went to that camp. But I also had a badge for community service, and I had a badge for community outreach. Like there were specific awards that I would relate to kind of those PLQs, which I think is really interesting. We sort of have that, but when you're talking about a peerage in particular, I think it then becomes this big sort of amorphous, I don't know what the criteria is. But because when I started in the SCA, I was real fringy for a while, and then I met a boy and I switched to a different group. And that group, which Walrick also played in, he was not the boy, but that group had actually broken off from the SCA. And as I heard the story from the people who founded that group, it was specifically because some of those founding members felt like they should be peers and they weren't. And I mean, that's what they said. Like that sounds like a really mean thing to say. And obviously it wouldn't have stuck around if it didn't have value. I mean, I think it still exists, that group. But so when they built that medieval club, they built it to be more objective. And so to become a knight artisan, there was a list of things that you had to achieve, and you had to have entered a certain number of ANS competitions. You had to have scored a certain number of total points, and you had to have a masterwork. And that masterwork was judged by 3 people, and there was like some business. I don't remember, it was a long time ago. But there was no social component to it other than the adjudication of this masterwork. And so, and I only pursued that track, so I don't remember what the other 2 were. I'm sure for fighting it was like you had to have a certain number of tournaments, or I don't even remember. Walrick would know, because he was in that group for a long time. But the problem is that you could become a knight and be a total jackass. And I'm not saying that you can't do that in the SCA, because we all know you can. But like I remember one person who was a knight artisan, right? Their equivalent of a laurel, who they had made one thing that was like super cool. And then all of the rest of their arts were all these little small kind of, I don't want to say lame, but they weren't particularly like interesting art, and they never changed.
No
And so
growth.
it's not that the person's skill wasn't good enough or whatever, but they didn't grow as an artist. That's the issue I had with it, right? Is they weren't doing new research, they weren't learning new skills, they weren't increasing either the depth or breadth of their own knowledge. They were just making like chainmail bracelet, chainmail bracelet, chainmail bracelet. I made that up. I don't remember what it was, but like every event there was a chainmail bracelet. And so they just accumulated those points little by little by little. And I sort of felt like that defeated the purpose. And I think that in the SCA, what certainly I like to see from artists is growth, right? The development of your skills, the development of your interest in a medieval art form. And certainly I hope that that's what other peerages look for as well. Like, I don't know about your circle, but I hope that you're looking for not just the increase of skill level, but also the growth of a person within the group, because, you know, as we all know, peerage is a job, and you want to make sure that somebody is going to grow into their position within the structure of the society. And I think that theoretically that's what a peer circle does. Like that's the subjective part of a peer circle, of a peer council, is, are they growing? Are they maturing into somebody who can contribute to the greater good? Is that better? I don't know. I think that you can point, I can point to examples in that other group where I thought people were achieving that rank without that growth, but I'm sure we can all think of people who are peers in the SCA who either didn't at the time show that growth and were elevated for whatever reason, or after they were elevated, dropped it off.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's a good answer to that.
There might not be. The truth is that merit badge style systems, as we can just kind of blanketly call them, are flawed, and very much as what we would call a more subjective system that we employ. I know several Eagle Scouts that got their Eagle Scout in the last 6 months of their eligibility.
Yeah.
And what that usually means is that they were pretty active until about age 14 or 15. Then they got firmly into high school and got involved in either a sport or something else, another interest, right?
Girls,
perhaps, whatever the case may be.
academics, obviously that's much more.
And no, as funny as that may be, that was the case for some of them. They wanted to focus more in school, and they didn't participate in the group. And part of being an Eagle versus just being a Boy Scout is that the whole point of creating Eagles is the same reason we create peers, is to create the leaders that will then lead the group and continue it and perpetuate it. If your troop's running well, all your Eagle Scouts are you're looking for like age 15, 16, so that 16, 17, 18, 19, they are leading the rest of the kids in the group. But the problem is that if they disappear off the face of the earth for 3 or 4 years there in the middle, and then come back, they've got 6 months until they turn 18. They've got to get a handful more merit badges and do some specific leadership tasks. Well, to me, that's very insincere. To me, that's a kid that thinks that they might be able to milk that for a scholarship. And I was always very, very contemptuous of such people, because I knew them from school. They couldn't bamboozle me. I knew that, that what their motivations were. It wasn't like their parents, who oftentimes will, snowball themselves into thinking that, that they did this because they wanted to. More often than not, kids that waited to that last minute, it was external motivation pushing them to do something. It wasn't about what they wanted. And I've always, until I stopped being active in that organization, I always was a proponent for Eagle's not the goal. Eagle is something some people do.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to have a good time, learn some skills. The goal, as stated by the national organization, was first class, which is in the middle. And that was where you got all the basic skills for camping and everything. After you did that, it was more about leadership and specific skills from badges. So I think you can say the same thing about the SCA in a big regard, is that peerage is not for everybody. And I think sometimes we make it seem like it should be. I think that we mistakenly throw it out there as being the thing everybody should want to do.
Yeah.
And the truth is that there's a lot of people in the SCA that have no interest in being what is required of them to be a peer. And that's
right. Hold on. My baby is asking me a question. I don't know, but I'm in the middle of something. So I also don't know. It depends.
I'm having cereal.
All right. I love you. Go away.
That's totally staying in. But
she just really wants dinner. I don't know what time it is even. Oh, it's almost 5.
Well,
they're old enough to reach the cabinets. They can make their own dinner.
I mean, Cora's really tall. Come on.
She cooks sometimes for us.
That's good. It's a good skill to have.
She makes a mean mac and cheese, I'll tell you.
Hey, I love mac and cheese.
And we have corn dogs in the freezer. I'm just saying. There's food for them. I'm an adequate parent.
But I think to bring it back to the largesse discussion.
Right. Focus.
That achievement is about elevating someone, but it's about elevating them for a purpose. It's not just about saying, hey, you're really good at whatever you do.
Yeah.
You name it.
Not a high five.
No, it's there's a burden to it. And I think that we're much better at explaining that there's a burden to being crown or a burden to being a coronet than we are at explaining that, or at least locally. I can't speak for everybody SCA wise, but I feel like we do a good job of discouraging people from, say, fighting in crown willy-nilly just on a whim, because that's a serious thing, man. You can't just show up and make that work. You've got to have a plan. Well, I think peerage falls under that as well. And I think that when a sovereign chooses to make a peer, when those two people get together and decide that we're going to elevate this person, they're putting their best hopes that that person will contribute in a way that helps lead the group. And if that person is not even aware that that's a standard, although one might challenge that notion, that they would be completely unaware. But I think there are a lot of folks that ask a lot of questions after they've been elevated because they didn't have that, the peerage is a job conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, you say that, people say being the crown is so much work, but nobody sees that work until you're in that job. Yeah. And so it doesn't matter how much you say it. I mean, it's like telling a 13-year-old that if they don't do their homework, they're going to have consequences. Like, you can say it all you want. It doesn't mean that it's connecting.
Sure.
And, when Walrick won crown the first time, I thought I knew exactly what I was getting myself into because my best friend had been crowned. I'd been on a bunch of courts. I'd managed a bunch of, my sister-in-law had been crowned. Like, I'd been associated with a lot of reigns, and I thought I had been associated at a very high level with them. Like, I thought I had seen, I traveled with crowns. I'd, run retinues. I mean, I thought I knew what I was doing. And then we were crowned and I was like, oh my God, what is that? I don't even know. And you feel so whiny saying it, right? You're like, oh, poor thing, you're the crown. It's so sad for you. But it is a lot of work and it's a big emotional burden. And I think the same thing is true with being a peer. You hear people say, well, it's a job, but the job that people see is, oh, you have to go to a circle at an event.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
and what they also see is, oh, you've got, and this I think is especially true for knights, right? Oh, you've got a bunch of squires to put up your stuff for you. You've got a bunch of squires who are gonna, clean your armor and do whatever. And, I think for me, oh, you have a bunch of students who are gonna like,
clean your shop.
I don't know what my students are supposed to do for me other than be rad, which they totally are. But I don't think that, I think there's so much that happens off screen, or off stage. And just because those stage directions are written down somewhere doesn't mean that you actually have visualized them and understand it and have like internalized what those stage directions are actually going to entail.
Yeah.
And I think that can be really tough, when you go into a circle and you say, well, are they going to do the job? And the answer from other peers is, well, who cares? Like, I've absolutely sat in circles where that's been a conversation. And I'm just like, okay. But again, I think that's a separate issue. I'm not going to,
sure.
I'm going to control myself. I think that until you have that job, it's hard to understand that job. And I think it's a lot like telling a kid, don't do drugs because of the future. They don't believe in the future.
Well, it's not material in that moment.
That's not a thing that's real. Yeah. And so I think when you say to someone, I understand that you want to be a peer and that's cool, but do you realize that you're going to have to do all this stuff and there are going to be all these expectations of you? It doesn't matter what you say. If they don't have a mechanism that allows them to internalize that message, then they're not going to.
Well,
hold on. My other child is now peering through the doorway. Whatever you make. I love you too.
Whatever you make.
It's approaching dinner time.
I think
they have corn dogs. It's fine.
Yeah.
Totally healthy.
There's
some carrot sticks in the fridge.
But no, but seriously, I think that largesse can help with this. If we are doing a better job of explaining what largesse could potentially mean.
Okay.
Let me throw this out there and see what you think. What if, it doesn't have to necessarily be the person that gives the award, but let's just say, since I can only control myself, let's say I give someone an award that carries an AOA in the barony, which several of ours do. And what if after the award has been given and the hurrah and everything after court, but before they leave for the day, I find those people that I gave that award to them and I say, hey, you were recognized for these things, like I said in court. And I really, when we say that we want you to continue to do these things, we mean it. Like, it's important. That's kind of the exchange. I gave you that because you're doing these things, but I don't expect you to stop.
Yeah.
It's contingent on you continuing to maintain it. And actually, a lot of our awards say that verbatim, that at the very end, usually, that it's not just that, oh, you did a great thing, but no. We want you to continue to provide this service, this your level of prowess, your energy, whatever, the reason was for giving the award. I think that having a conversation like this and maybe having more conversations where we get people to understand that interplay a little bit better, that yes, giving an award is important for all the things we discussed earlier, but it's also important for the structure of what we're trying to recreate. We are trying to get people to participate in positive and constructive ways. And when they do that consistently, they deserve an award. But that doesn't mean that you get to drop off after that award's been given. Like you say, I think that that's what turns it into the proverbial cookie, is when people achieve and then game's over. And we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago with Sir Bardolph, is that there are a lot of folks for which that is how they play all games. Once I've achieved the high score, and maybe that's why the system that was employed by that other group was maybe a little bit more effective for those folks that played it. That seems like a high score kind of situation. Like, I'm going to achieve what it says I need to achieve. I'm going to get what I want, and then I'm going to move on to something else. I think there's room for people that play the SCA like that. Obviously there is, people do that. And I don't have a problem with that insofar as, if you're doing the thing and you're achieving at that level, you should be recognized. But peerage is a little different. And I think it's because you are now not only saddled with the responsibility of maintaining a level of positive interaction and play with the rest of the community, you're also charged with its maintenance on a much broader scope. It's no longer about, do I get to choose to do this or choose to do that? There's just some things that are kind of become your obligation, depending on, which period you're elevated to. And there are some people who take that very seriously. A practical example I can think of is Knights martial tournaments, particularly Crown Tournament. That's something that our Knights and our Masters take very seriously. And, you're never going to want for marshals at a tournament like that, because they're going to do that. And I would assume that there are laurels that think that, if we're having a Kingdom Arts and Sciences competition, I'm going to judge. I'm going to be a part of that if I'm not competing. So
I don't think I've missed judging at an ANS competition since I was elevated. I don't enter anymore.
Yeah.
I like
that's, personal choice.
I miss that. But yeah, but that is right. That's the job. And I think, is it Martino who talks about producers and consumers?
Maybe.
Isn't that his?
It wouldn't surprise me.
I'll give it to him. I think that's who it was, who I first heard that from. But the idea that in the SCA, you have both producers and consumers, just like in any ecosystem. And the expectation is that when you start, you're a consumer, and that's fine because that's where you're at. And the producers are going to help you. I guess not like an ecosystem, right? I'm not going to eat them, but that would be weird. But, that you sort of get, and in any group, and I mean, I think this is probably true in scouting. It's like you were talking about Eagle Scouts who come back and they haven't provided that leadership, is that, for a while, you're going to be a consumer and you're going to take what other people are giving you, and that's appropriate. But there's a point at which you have to give that back.
Yes.
And I feel like when you become a peer, that's the point at which it's like, all right, time's up. time to be helpful. And now it's your job to help the consumers until they're ready to be producers, right? And help turn them into producers. And I think that's a really important part of peerage. And I think a lot of peers that I interact with feel that way, where there's that obligation, but it's not like oh, I have to help this person. Bleh. Like we want to do that because we want to pay back the people who helped us. Every time I think about the way that I ought to be with my students, I think about Domingo. I think about my Laurel and how generous he was with me. And I wish that I could be that awesome. I don't think I am. I think I would like to get there, right? It's aspirational. Or I think about the other people who mentored me, Alex or whatever. I think peers, I think that's part of our job too, is to be aspirational, not just in terms of the actual thing that we do. I want to dress in a way that's aspirational. I want to make a scroll that people are like, oh my gosh, I want to learn how to do shading, or I want to practice my calligraphy. Like I want to produce items or artistic contributions that are aspirational, but I want to be aspirational as a peer. I constantly want that. There's ebb and flow about that, but because you can only do what you can do. And I think that does become a little overwhelming sometimes, especially for people who aren't quite prepared for it, is that idea that, I've been working my butt off to get this peerage and I'm burned out and I just want to relax. I just want to, crack a beer next to the list field and not worry about it. And, then I think sometimes other peers we're not always so nice about encouraging people to kind of come back to the producer side, and that can become really antagonistic and it can become a whole thing. But, I think you have to let people have a moment sometimes, right? Not all peers can be their best selves all the time. I think right now is a super good example of that. But I don't remember what we were talking about. I'm totally off on a tangent now.
No, I think you're doing great. No,
Peers should be helpful, help the group grow or something.
No, you absolutely should. And I think that by understanding that the largesse that was put upon you by elevating your station comes with an obligation, and that obligation increases as the entitlement increases.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the medieval liege isn't giving you a horse for funsies. He's giving you a horse so that you can go take back the Holy Land. Like there's a reason for it.
Right.
It's not.
And to put it in a modern context, the liege is not giving you a peerage so that you can wear really cool stuff and go to parties and look down at people. That's what I'm saying.
That's not why you're getting that. Definitely.
That accoutrement is really great, but the truth is that you're not being given a laurel, knighthood, or any of that, so that you can just walk around with stuff pinned to your clothes. Dang
it.
And that's and I think you were kind of speaking to that sort of thing. Is that we should certainly hold people accountable and encourage them to be or contribute at the level that they've been recognized, but it is okay to take a break. It absolutely is. And burnout is something we all deal with at one point or the other, whether you're a peer or not, or whatever.
And health, like poor Walrick, right? He the Outlands missed all of this, but he got knighted and then he had to have knee surgery like, I don't know, a couple months later, and couldn't really fight for like the first year after he got knighted. And I'm going to tell you that some of our friends who loved him and respected him, they were mean to him about it. And, Walrick's a pretty relaxed guy, and he laughed it off, but it really hurt his feelings after a while, because people were making him feel like he wasn't doing the job, and he takes the job very seriously.
Yes.
He wants to be a good knight. And in an SCA context specifically, he wants to do the job. And he wants to be a producer, and he wants to help the SCA grow, and he wants to support his local groups as much as he can. And, for that year, he physically couldn't. And it was really difficult for him, especially since he was the baronial marshal. So he had to go to every practice and watch everyone else fight. And here he is with this shiny new white belt that he couldn't get dirty.
Right.
And I think that can be really tough, because we all want people to be active. There are people who were active at one point in our SCA careers, and now they're gone, and we want them back. And I think we don't always do a great job of expressing that in a constructive or kind way. And I'm not sure that we mean to do it. Like our friends weren't trying to hurt his feelings. He's gonna be mad that I said that they hurt his feelings. He doesn't have feelings.
He'll get over it.
He's totally stoic. They weren't trying. They cared about him. They loved him. They were teasing him.
Sure.
Right. And I think we all do that. We mean well, but I think that can be tough for a peer. I mean, I think it is a job, and I think most peers that I've encountered, at least, really do think of it as a job, and they take that job seriously. They may have a different definition of the job than I do, but that doesn't mean that they're not doing what they perceive as their job.
Sure.
But yeah, people have health things, people have family things, people start working 80 hours a week. And that's tough. And I think too, when you get peers that have been peers for a long time, it can be hard to maintain your motivation. It can get, like, when you're kind of doing the same thing all the time, I think it can be difficult to maintain your level of participation. And I don't know how to solve that one. I've been struggling with that myself for years.
I think that nobility can help with that through continued acts of largesse, because largesse doesn't have to just be an award or a physical object.
Absolutely.
I've called people into court just to say thank you, just to tell everybody how cool the thing that they just did was, and this is it. It's just a thank you.
Yeah. I wish we did more of that. I think that would be good.
I think so too. And I think that identifying it oftentimes helps to correct it. So, maybe somebody listening to this will take it to heart. And if they're in the position to do a little bit more thinking and recognizing of folks that may be struggling with some of the things you mentioned, it could be all the better. I think mercy is something that should be at all of our hearts when it comes to dealing with our fellow SCA denizens. We occupy the same space. We're a community. And even when somebody messes up catastrophically, rarely can I say that I would have ever thought that they did it out of pure malice. Usually they are just as befuddled that they made the mistake as everybody else is. So understanding that when people have to take time to let injuries heal, maybe not the best way to greet them when they come back the first day to actually fight.
Finally.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of thing. My knight, Sir Thomas, he spoke to me about that as a squire and said, when you come back from a long absence, sometimes it can be hard socially, and people will razz you. And I just try to encourage everybody to say what they really mean to say, which is, hey man, I missed you.
Yeah. It's great to see you out again.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes we forget that simple responses, heartfelt responses, are probably the best way to communicate. I think sometimes we want to go for the joke, or we want to go for the little, hassle, and sometimes that works. But I think for me, it's far more productive to just say what you mean to say, let them know you missed them. That's going to get them to come back next week.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And that, I think that's a way that everybody can give largesse. Letting people know how you feel about them, and letting them know that, hey, you are valued. Like if we were a little bit more liberal with our compliments and our praise, just person to person, regardless of rank, if courtesy were more at the top of our list more often, I think that that can't generate bad things. I think they can only generate good things. And I think by and large, people are complimentary. I think that I think we all got a little bit of sarcasm in us and a little bit of wanting to be maybe too familiar, make the joke, that sort of thing. But in my experience, I feel like being a little bit more, like I said, liberal with that praise, liberal with those good words, it generates return and can be very, very good for the community.
Yeah, I agree. You don't have to elevate somebody to a peerage to elevate their mood.
That's very true.
To show them that they're elevated in your heart.
Absolutely. And you don't know how people view you. Somebody gave me some very good advice upon my vigil, which was, there are people at this event right now, Roland, that will never, ever know you as anything other than Sir Roland. They will never have known Squire Roland. They will never have known Roland the Knave, which was my original name. They will never have known that person. So understanding that your words have weight, that your actions have weight, helps me to better use those actions to affect better outcomes for the group. And I think that oftentimes we associate largesse with either being generous, outwardly and publicly generous, or it's something that crowns and cornets do. But
yeah,
I don't think that that's necessarily true. We're all noble by the standard of the SCA, and if we're all supposed to be acting in a noble context, from the high Middle Ages, we'll say. I mean, we obviously cover a bigger area than that, but that context means that you have the ability with your words alone to elevate others. And if you
absolutely.
can, and if you feel compelled, especially, you should. So
I agree.
yeah, I'm glad we.
Yeah, I like the idea of a largesse of words.
Yes, I think that
Compliment.
that's very, very good thing. I've got a couple more if you've got the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hear knives and forks downstairs, so
Somebody's
my children have sorted themselves out.
bachelor casserole. I'm sure Jacob can make bachelor casserole.
My kids, they like a good bowl of cereal for dinner.
So
That's
did
not
my
healthy.
mother. So did my mother.
I do too. I've actually only eaten cereal today.
Well, there you go.
That's it. And tea. And I feel fine. I'm totally healthy.
All right. So
Very adequate parent. Well, Eric's gonna see this and he's gonna be like, no, not cereal. He hates cereal for dinner. He thinks it's the worst thing on earth. Tell the girls, well, don't eat it when he's home.
this is from the guy who eats spaghetti burritos. I don't want to hear it.
Well, that's true. And also, Walrick, that's not true at all. I'm gonna go make them a super healthy meal when I get done here.
For sure. So what are some examples from your personal experience of times when a crown or a landed noble really inspired you or people around you to action, whether it was to create, whether it was to maybe go and participate in a specific event? Like, has there ever been a moment where you felt really like, yeah, I'm going to go support the crown, or I'm going to go support my barony, and we're going to go do this thing? What was that like?
Honestly, the only example I can think of off the top of my head is totally self-serving because it was Walrick.
That's okay.
And it was, and I know this is like not an Outlands thing.
That's okay too.
But do you remember what a big deal Walrick made about fighting in Crown?
Absolutely.
So every court, he had this big, because he thinks people should fight in Crown.
That is very much his, yes.
It is, and
anybody doesn't know him, that is what he has always been.
And truthfully, it's how he was raised, right? That's an Eight and Belt thing. Like, because that's an awesome tournament to fight in as a fighter. That's where everyone's fighting at their highest. Like, you're never going to get a fight from anybody the way that you're going to get a fight in Crown Tournament. But also it's a really great tournament to participate in terms of like contributing something meaningful to the kingdom culturally. Like, Crown is a big deal. There's ceremony, there's pomp. You have a consort that you're fighting for. And I mean, we have like Sword and Shield at Battlemore, which has sort of become that too, which I think is awesome. But I think that the whole context of Crown Tourney is a really big deal to him. And I happen to agree with him. But, you know, we historically, I think we've had bigger numbers in the last handful of years. But, you know, when we first came here, you know, wasn't unusual for a Crown to have 5 or 6 fighters in it. And coming from a kingdom where it wasn't unusual to have 40 fighters in a Crown, that was like a huge culture shock. And I think he just wanted more people to participate because it's more fun. It's more of a spectacle. He wants Crown to be a spectacle. He wants people to attend. He wants people to support that event, to travel for it, because it's such a big deal to our kingdom. And so he just wanted more people to fight in it. So he made a big deal, right? And it was every court, I'm going to give a big speech. And I found his speeches very rousing. You know, he's a good orator and he had some good points. And I'll tell you what, we had like, I don't remember, 30 something fighters.
Yeah, y'all had a good Crown.
That day was so much fun. Like there was so many people and it was in like a giant horse barn. And I remember my poor Sophia, she's really sensitive to loud noises. It was so noisy in this big horse barn. There's like a picture of her and I where she's got her ears covered. And that's what it is she's so freaked out by the sound. Poor thing. Little sensory issue. But it was just like the energy of that tournament was so different because there were so many people there. Yeah. And they were all focused on something that's really important to the kingdom. And so I don't know if that really counts as largesse. So
this is where I'm going with that.
Okay.
I think that I think my whole point in kind of bringing in the period context of largesse was to make the point that it's an exchange of goods.
Yes.
And whereas crowns and to a lesser extent coronets have the ability to give certain goods in the form of a variety of things, which we've discussed, there's also the opportunity to inspire people to play the game. And I would argue that that is also a form of largesse. You're giving people a purpose. And what you just described is a fabulous example that I think pops up every few reigns here in the Outlands since I've been playing. I would say that every crown does promote their crown tournament, but there are some crowns who believe that, much as Walrick does, that everybody should elevate that event to the best it possibly can be. And having more consorts, more combatants, more pomp and circumstance, more heralds, more banners, you know, the huge field with everybody's shade gathered around it. When we get that situation, that kind of that perfect storm of activity, Crown Tournament can be a super magical thing in this kingdom, I think. And I think that anybody's Crown Tournament has that potential. And I think that if you can inspire a populace to respond in that regard, you have elevated everyone's experience through your actions. And though I might be reaching, and I'm sure Bardolph would say I am, I think that could be construed as largesse because you are giving people a singular focus for which to act. And if we're talking about the period version of largesse, you gave goods and provided for those who were your retainers so that they could then act on your behalf. And I think that in our modern context, we're not necessarily going to send people out on crusade per se, right? We're not really going to fight and die, but we are trying to get people to support an event, right? We are trying to motivate people to give all they can to make what we're doing the best it possibly can be.
Yeah, to create those moments.
Yes, because the creative part of it doesn't, like you said, people lack for motivation sometimes. And when you lack for motivation, your creativity generally doesn't flow. But if the motivation is there, I've seen people go hog wild on a crown tournament processional, and they should. And nobody should ever get whiny and complainy that takes a long time, because you know what? They get their moment. That person, that new AOA fighter that brought 20 people to march in their, procession and made all these banners, and everybody's wearing matching garb, and
so cool.
It's fantastic. And you know what? That should be encouraged, because that fighter might be out in two. But you know what? They gave to the event in a way that is worthy. It's very worthy.
They went to the finals of my heart.
Exactly. There's something to be said for that. And I think that, I think in our kingdom, more than any other single event, Crown Tournament tends to be the one where I think we're all moving in the same direction most of the time to try to create the atmosphere that we're looking for.
Yeah.
I think Battlemore gets that in fits and starts, I think that some of the bigger events that some of the baronies throw also get that. I'd say the winter feasts can oftentimes be everybody moving in one direction, but Crown Tournaments, I think, a great example of how if orchestrated properly and properly motivated, the whole kingdom moves in that direction. And
I think with Crown, there's what's going on.
Yes, I mean, there's a the really program's not weird.
Purpose.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that can be really helpful. Everyone wants the same thing on that day.
You're right. Yes.
There's one activity that's the focus of everyone's attention. There's one unified goal and outcome, and it's to see who wins Crown Tournament. That's what we're doing. And I think there's very few events I can think of where everyone is focused on the same thing. Because, I don't go to Battlemore to fight. So Walrick and I don't have unified goals when we go to Battlemore. He's going to fight. I don't even know what I'm going for, right? I'm going to teach a class. I'm going to hang out by the river. I'm going to shrubs. Make some scones.
Yeah.
Ply people with some stuff. And I think everyone goes to an event like that with a different goal, a different set of activities that they're interested, but not Crown.
No.
Because even if you don't care who wins, you're still there to see who wins.
That's
we're not having, a A&S classes at the same time as the list is running. We're not having a feast at the same time as the list is running. Like when the list is running, that's what you're doing. Yes. And I mean, obviously I don't care about fighting. Sorry, Walrick. I don't care. Lots of people who don't fight love fighting. I could care less. I don't understand it. I don't find it enjoyable to watch. I watch him when it's relevant. We came to that agreement early on in our relationship. I just don't care. But I care about Crown Tournament.
Sure. Because I think uniquely, it's one of the few things where we all are doing the same thing, but there is something for everybody.
Well, and there's an outcome that affects us all.
That's very true too. And I think that that's probably at its core as to why, at least here locally, we can really, especially if you've got a crown pushing it in a similar way that you described, you can really get the whole of the kingdom moving in that direction. Yeah. And
I say that it's that tournament's the only thing that matters, but what's interesting about that tournament is that everyone can contribute to that atmosphere.
Absolutely.
There's only heavy fighters on the field, but I'm an artist. Man, can I contribute to the atmosphere of Crown Tournament? Anyone who's doing service, there's loads of opportunities for you to help make that tournament happen. And so it's like this big, it has such a narrow focus, but it has such a big envelope of context around it. And I think that there's something for everyone. We think about Battlemore as having something for everyone because there's classes and there's rapier tournaments and there's heavy tournaments and there's archery and there's, there's a pocket activity for everyone. But for Crown, it's one activity that we're all doing together, even though we're all doing different things. It's all funneling into the same thing. And I can't think of another event where that happens.
I
I
would
love
agree.
the tournament.
Yeah, Crown Tournament's a fantastic day. And there are some folks that I've known that like that is what they prepare for. I mean, they will go to other things, but
Crown's a
whether
big one.
they are fighting in Crown or not, they really
Yeah.
want to go and see. Go and see. And I think that a sovereign can choose to play into that and really amp it up and provide that focus that then motivates the entire community to respond. Um, my last one for you. What are some of your favorite expressions of largesse from your time in the SCA?
I think my very favorite thing, and I can't remember the first crown I saw do it. I think for in Atenvelt, it was pretty typical for a while. Was giving things to people where it was their first event. That is my absolute favorite largesse to do, and it's my favorite thing to see still. Any event where I see a crown do that, I'm like, yep, I'm excited right now.
Yeah.
Because those people have gone up, it's their first event. They're getting to see that all of the people around them are excited about them being there. And the fancy people at the front are recognizing that they're even just there. Not because they've done anything, but just because we're happy to see them. That's my absolute favorite. And it was one of my favorite things to do as crown. And like I was excited to do that as crown. I was like, I want to be crowned. So I mean, like that was a big deal to us. And I love seeing it. I think that as largesse goes, being able to pull someone up and say, I'm really happy that you're here. And so are all these other people. I mean, I suppose it's like giving an award, right? Where you have that recognition, but it's not for something you've done. It's just because you're there and we're just happy to see you. And I think that I hope for new people, I hope that that's an important moment, that that's an impactful moment for them. But I don't think it's just about them. Just like with an award, I think that moment is also a big deal for all of us watching it, because it's us constantly reinforcing, and it's potentially the crown or the landed nobility reinforcing to the populace, new people are important. Let's pay attention to new people. Let's embrace new people. Let's make an effort to remember that new people need to be recognized and nurtured. And so I think that's like a wonderful sort of repeated, potentially moment of there's a word that I had that was really good. I just totally lost it. It's a good thing to do. That was not the word. It's a good thing to do. I think it's a great way to create a sense of community. I think it's a good way to reinforce community goals and community identity.
Yes.
So that's my favorite.
I remember you guys doing it as crown. It was a great concept. I've seen a lot of crowns since take up that concept.
I love the cups that Johan and Martine did.
Yes, they did.
That was really great. Cool. Here's a cup to toast with. I mean, you talk about largesse, right? Here's a horse, now go fight. Here's a cup, I want to toast with you. Like, God, that was so good.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's obviously materials consumptive. Like you've got to be reasonable in terms of material and financial outlay. And it was really awesome that they were able to do that and got a lot of those cups given to them. But man, that was a good one. I really like that variation of it a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Very similar to a practice in Callantyre. They've been doing that for quite some time. First timers getting
they're so good at community.
They really are, and
they're so good at community building.
And I think that their example is a good one to follow in a lot of regards. I think that there's any number of them that could probably point out their own flaws, but I would definitely say that through their generosity of material, of spirit, and really doing what you just said, recognizing that new people, they need to feel accepted. And what could be more of a gesture of acceptance than saying, hey, thanks for being here, man. Thanks for showing up. Here's something to remember us by. And a mug, like you said, let's toast. I mean, we're a social animal, the SCA.
Absolutely.
It's very heart. You can argue about how authentic some of us are. You can argue about what our motivations for playing in terms of whether it's art, whether it's fighting, whether it's service. There's all kinds of ways to play the SCA, but the one thing that is universal is that we do it together. It's very much there's a social component at every level,
Yeah.
and by making people feel welcome and letting them know that yeah, we want you to come by the fighter night and drink a toast with us. That's the open invitation you need to elevate their interest and motivation to continue to play. And there we are again with Largesse. The Largesse that everyone can participate in is
Yep. Being
taking time,
welcoming.
yeah, taking time to elevate someone else, however that may manifest.
I'm going to start doing that more, Roland.
Well,
I'm motivated now.
I'm glad.
I'm engaged by this concept.
For sure. I dig it. I want to thank you so very much for being with me today and having this
It was
conversation.
my pleasure.
This was delightful.
I talked in circles around your questions.
No, we did fine. We did fine.
You knew it was going to happen.
Well, it's happened at every single one so far, so it's okay. This one I think stayed on track a lot better than some of the others.
That's shocking.
But you know what the thing is that picking a single topic, you run that risk because you know we want to talk about what we want to talk about, and sometimes tangents happen. It's not a big deal. But ultimately, I think we stayed on topic pretty well, and I think that we did a very nice job of examining both what we're doing now in terms of Largesse, how we kind of conceive it and how we practice it, and how maybe an adherence to or a study of a more period context might be able to help us do that a little better. And that was my goal for this discussion. And I'd like to thank all of you listening. I hope that you got something out of this. I certainly did. Duchess Cecilia is her and I have a lot of great conversations, so I doubt this will be the last time we see her. Quick reminder, we are still seeing a ton of great creativity being manifested on the internet. That's Ted. Hey, there's some strange person causing his hackles to raise. Poor dude.
It's Christmas season. It's always Amazon, right?
Right, for sure.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Ted agrees with you entirely.
Yes, exactly. Like I
He's
said,
not a hospitable person, as
well,
you know.
he doesn't need to be. Doug. The Outlands royalty is still going. Their Majesties are doing a great job of documenting some of the
I think
fascinating.
I'm on that in 2 weeks.
Yeah, you're coming up on that, right?
19. I should probably check.
You should.
I'm sure someone will remind me.
No doubt. One would hope. Also, Sir Bohemian's out there doing a lot of craft videos.
His videos are super fun.
They are, and I think they're pretty well received. So if you haven't checked that out yet, go ahead and do that. And furthermore, many Outlanders and indeed people from across the SCA are getting on social media platforms or Zoom or the like, and having these good conversations. So whatever that looks like for you, I encourage you to do it. And if you are local, that is to say, if you are from the Outlands or you're from Alberon, particularly on December 19th, we will be getting together via Zoom to celebrate the arts and sciences by having a midwinter virtual arts and science collegium. It is being headed up by Lord Ethelwolf. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to him. We will be having classes throughout the day. We will have an open sort of hangout room where conversations can flow. I'm personally hoping to have several conversations about the future of the SCA here locally. What does the SCA look like after COVID? What could change that could be beneficial? What should we keep the same? All that kind of stuff. So come join me in the common room or jump into one of the classes. We will have announcements throughout the day. There's a populace meeting that will take place for the barony during the lunch hour. And we're going to have a play along at home feast and a bardic that night to celebrate. And I'd love to see as many of you come and join us as possible. I think it'll be a truly a great way for us to connect in these trying times. So, with that being said, once again, thank you, Duchess Cecilia.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And we'll catch you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye.
On a hill stood an old knight, grey-bearded and weathered. I said, "Sir, pray tell me what wisdom you can." He said, "Squire, listen, I'll tell you a secret. To be a good knight, you need only to stand. Gotta stand for your people, lend them your hand. Stand for the crown, defend the king's land. Gotta stand for your lady and be a good man. For the crown, for the land." Well, the years went by swiftly, one after another. I won my spurs at the word of my king. And in the long days, for winters and summers, I live by the words that were spoken to me. You gotta stand for your people, lend them your hand. Stand for the crown, defend the king's land. Gotta stand for your lady and be a good man. For the crown, for the land. So young men and squires, give service in bardics. Fight for your ladies and honor the queen. And if you seek the gold spurs, the chain and the white belt, remember the bold words the old knights sing. Gotta stand for your people, lend them your hand. Stand for the crown, defend the king's land. Gotta stand for your lady and be a good man. For the crown, for the land.